that can have that's a double-edged sword. You know, a lot of people will stay, but a lot of people will look at that eye-watering bill to stay and think, all right, I've got to bite the bullet. It's time to move. Of course, there's also tied up with that the move to the cloud. People want to have everything on the cloud. They don't want to have anything on-prem. Power BI was the first and is still by far the leading cloud-first BI platform. And then last of all, and I think this is something that I'm going to come back to and talk about in a lot more depth, a lot of people realize the way they've been doing BI in the past is really not very efficient. And they know a lot of the pain that they've gone through with failed BI projects, especially ones where IT's ended up being the bottleneck. And they think, well, we're going through digital transformation. We want to empower our workforce. We want to get on the self-service BI bandwagon. And Power BI is a number of things. It can certainly be a great corporate BI tool, but it's absolutely a self-service BI tool as well. And that's that organizational shift is behind a lot of migrations. So these are all of the things that people have, organizations have in their mind when they are thinking about moving to Power BI. And like I said, the number one issue is generally cost saving. So what are, with all this in mind, what are the things, what are the do's and don'ts of migrating? What are the traps that people fall into when they migrate? The first thing to talk about is data modeling. So when you think about reports, a lot of people think, well, a report is a report. You just take any BI tool, slap it on top of some data, and it just works. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Any BI tool has particular requirements about how it likes to have its data modeled. And something that I see quite a lot is when you're doing a migration, you think, well, it's just going to be a lift and shift. We'll keep the data source the same, and we'll just take the reports that we had in our old tool, rebuild them in Power BI, bish, bash, bosh, and we're good. This, for a number of reasons, as we'll see in this session, is the key to failure. The first reason why people run into trouble by doing this is because Power BI has some quite particular demands for how it likes its data modeled. Power BI, especially if you're using Power BI datasets, likes a dimensional model. It likes your data separated out into fact tables and dimension tables. And not even any dimensional model. Quite often, there are multiple different ways to interpret the way you model data as a dimensional model. And you are going to have to go back and think about remodeling your data so it works best with Power BI. There's no way of avoiding this. And the trap a lot of people run into is, like I said, not modeling their data. Other tools, for example, Tableau, really prefer to work with wide, flat tables. That's a modeling choice. That may well be the best thing for certain other tools. That's not the best way to work with Power BI. And if you keep, for example, your wide, flat tables and you put them on top of Power BI, you can certainly get things working and you can get something out of the door, but you may not get the best possible performance. And other things like building more complex calculations can certainly get more and more complicated. Now, people don't like to remodel their data because remodeling the data takes extra time and money. We're no longer just recreating a bunch of reports. You're going back to the source and rebuilding and re-implementing a lot of quite complicated, skilled work. People don't like this. People don't like spending time and money. But again, this is something that I think is going to be unavoidable if you want to be successful with Power BI. So definitely think about remodeling your data. Another very, very similar issue is how you work with your data. As you probably know, if you're using data sets with Power BI and you're using Power BI in the kind of classic sense, you've got to build a data set the data set likes data modeled as a dimensional model. And that data set can be in import mode or in direct query mode or in some particular mix. Now, in import mode, you end up copying all of the data needed by your reports into Power BI's own in-memory column store or database. In direct query mode, you have a data set, but the data set doesn't store any data. And when your reports run, Power BI queries the data set generates SQL queries to get the data it needs on demand from the data source, brings it back, puts everything back together, and gives it back to the report. A lot of people, because that's how their old BI tool works, a lot of people just say, well, my old tool used the equivalent of direct query. That's what I'm used to. That's what I'm going to carry on doing. That, again, can lead to problems. In the Power BI world, we're pretty clear that the best practice is always to use import mode as your default. If you don't know what to use import mode. You should only use direct query mode unless you've got some very particular reasons to use it. And those reasons tend to be because you've got really, really large volumes of data, or you've got really, really low latency scenarios. How much data is too much for import mode? Well, again, it depends on how skillful you are with using Power BI, but certainly we've got enterprise customers who've got fact tables of several billion rows, which they work with quite happily in import mode. How much data or how much latency can you bear? If you go back to your end users will say, well, of course I need real-time data, and of course they don't really. So, quite often what your users say is maybe not particularly correct. They might say they want real-time data, but maybe the data in your data source is only ever updated once a day. So there's not much you can do. So again, just because your previous BI tool generated SQL queries to get data on demand, that doesn't mean that's how you should work with Power BI. You should think about using import mode as your default, and then only using direct query when you've got a really good reason to. People don't only use direct query for those reasons though as well. Something else we see quite a lot is that people tend towards direct query mode because that's what other vendors involved in the BI project use. Again, naming no names, there are certain cloud-based data warehouse vendors who get paid per query. And as a result, the salespeople for these cloud data warehouse vendors will naturally tell you that Power BI should work in direct query mode to make sure that as much load is put on the data warehouse as possible so they get the most money. Is that a good idea? Well, and it's a good idea for the sales team for your cloud data warehouse vendor. From our point of view in Power BI, we still say use import mode because that's going to give you the best performance. And when we talk to customers, they typically find that it also saves them a lot of money as well, because extracting the data once, copying it into Power BI, and then having all the queries answered from Power BI's in-memory column store database tends to be a lot more cost effective as well as fast. So again, listen to us, not them, use import mode. Perhaps the last reason why people use it, direct query mode, is maybe the one where there's a little bit more room for discussion. Centralization of security is a really valid thing to want to have. If you've got your company's most sensitive data all stored in one place, then it's only natural that you want to put it in the relational data warehouse, apply security there once, and have all of the BI tools that connect to it reuse the security defined in that one place. You don't want to be trying to recreate security in multiple places. That, I think, is a worthy goal to aspire to, and it's a valid reason to want to use direct query mode. But again, performance and user experience trumps everything else. And if you are going to get much better performance and perhaps better cost optimization by using import mode in Power BI, well, maybe you need to compromise on where the security is designed as well. I don't think anybody at the moment has a great answer to this question, but who knows, maybe in the future there'll be some things that change here. Moving on, perhaps the most common thing that you'll hear during any migration project is the phrase, just make it work like the old reports used to work. Because let's face it, if you're migrating because somebody says we've got to save some money, you're not migrating to get a great new experience. You want things to carry on as they are. Maybe you're quite happy. You just want to spend less cash. And this is, again, something that can really, really, really lead you into trouble, because no BI tool is the same. Every BI tool works in slightly different ways and has slightly different functionality. And if you want to try to make Power BI look and feel and behave just like your old tool did, the end result is going to be a much slower migration. The people building the reports and the data sets behind are going to have to do all kinds of complex workarounds to make Power BI behave perhaps in the way that it doesn't normally behave. And even then, you're not going to quite do everything that you want in Power BI, and people still complain. So what I would say instead is try to push back on this if you can. Say, don't try and recreate the functionality you had before, but think about the business requirements. What's the problem you're trying to solve with the reports, and use the functionality that Power BI actually has to meet those requirements. And also, if people are complaining about the fact that their old BI tool did something that Power BI can't, well, focus on the positives, because the chances are that Power BI can do a lot of stuff that your old BI tool can't. So you might be losing some things, but you're probably gaining an awful lot more. But I don't want to kind of detract from this problem, because however much you argue about this, it's almost impossible to win this argument. So perhaps there are better ways of trying to avoid this argument taking place in the first place. So I'll come back to this problem a little bit later. And then finally in this section, something that's perhaps relevant for an audience that is more focused on paginated reports than anything else. A lot of the time when people choose to use Power BI, they've seen demos of kind of regular Power BI reports, and they think, well, that's Power BI. It's got this nice flashy interactive report tool. That's the tool we should use. And that ignores the fact that it's not the only way to present your data in Power BI. We have, of course, got paginated reports. We've also got Excel as the first-class front end for data in Power BI. You've got Analyze in Excel that allows you to build pivot tables and quite complex reports in Excel connected up to data live in your Power BI dataset. So the worst excesses of Excel hell are avoided. And these Excel reports can be published to the Power BI service and consumed through the browser as well. So I guess what I'm saying here is, don't just assume that every single use case can be met with a regular Power BI report. That is, again, a way to end up failing. Regular Power BI reports are great for those kind of interactive, clicky dashboards, but paginated reports are absolutely the right thing to use when you want those pixel perfect printable reports, when you want to be able to publish long lists of invoices or customers or something. And of course, and I think this is something that Paul Turley was talking about last time you had your meeting, there are going to be scenarios where you don't even want to use a dataset. There are going to be scenarios where you want to be able to just write your own SQL, use a stored procedure, for example, to get the data you need for your reports. That's something that a regular Power BI report sitting on top of a dataset doesn't work well with. That's something that a paginated report really shines with. So, choose your front end wisely. And of course, like I said right at the beginning, if you're migrating, this is an opportunity to really change the way that Power BI is done inside your organization. You're probably already painfully aware of the problems that you've had in the past with BI. This is a good opportunity to not only change your tool, but to change the approach to BI completely. Generally speaking, I kind of think about the two extremes of doing BI in a company. On one hand, there is the very, very corporate BI approach, where the IT department controls everything, the IT department does everything. And if you want reports built, you want access to the data, well, tough. The IT department has to be the gatekeeper. Now, the benefits of this are that everything is done properly by a fully qualified engineer. The downside, of course, is that this is slow. It takes a long time. It's expensive because you've got to get everything done by a fully qualified person, and effectively IT becomes the bottleneck. This is also a problem because IT doesn't always understand the business requirements in the way that a business user does. The analogy I always give is it's like typewriters. I'm sure everybody here, if we went back in time 50 years, we were working in the companies we were working in 50 years ago, we would all have somebody there to do our typing for us. You know, we might not even be able to type. If we wanted to write a letter or have a memo published, we would go to a professional typist and dictate, and that person would type out an old manual typewriter. And guess what? I'm sure they could spell a lot better than we could, and they could probably type a lot faster, even on a manual typewriter, than we could today on a keyboard on a PC using Word. But would anybody actually want to go back to doing that? Like, I don't think so. I'm perfectly happy writing on Word today every time I want a document. Why is this? Well, it's not just for reasons of cost. It's because I find it easier to express myself when I write my own documents. If I want to make a change, I can just go back and re-edit it. In the old days with the typewriter, I had to go in, understand what I was going to say it, have it typed up, check it. If I made a mistake, well, I've got to go back to the typist, have it retyped. It's a very painful process because you've got to interface with other people. Whereas writing with Word today is just much easier because I can do everything myself. And I would say this also applies to BI. If you're somebody who consumes reports, if you're somebody who needs to use data to do your job, you have that innate understanding of what it is you want to do. And sometimes it's actually easier for you to struggle to build your own reports and make mistakes and then correct them and do all this yourself than have to go to a fully qualified, highly skilled technical person like Chris Webb sitting in the IT department, explain your requirements, wait 3 weeks for them to have time to do it. They build it, they come back to you, they've misunderstood what you want, you've actually not communicated what you want, or you've changed your mind, they have to go back and change it and come back. That's a very frustrating process. That's not an efficient way of doing anything. So this is, I think, why corporate BI is not a great approach to doing everything, because you've got to interface with all these other people. And that's why I think self-service BI has become so popular over the last 10 or 15 years. But that's not to say that we want to go back to the bad old days of Excel hell, where everybody did everything in Excel and there was no governance, there was no quality control, there was no single version of the truth. Everybody went to meetings with, different versions of the same numbers. And, when somebody went on vacation, the reports didn't get built. What Power BI and governed self-service BI gives you is the ability to get the best of self-service BI without any of the downsides of corporate BI or Excel hell. And migrating is a great opportunity to have that kind of change. And what we find is certainly a lot of companies are really very interested in moving to this model. So those are, I think, the kind of do's and don'ts from a customer point of view of what you should think about when you're migrating to Power BI. But there's another angle to this. There are going to be people out there, people at partners, consultancies, who see that you have a problem and they want to help. And, in a lot of cases, they are going to be able to help very effectively. But you have to understand their motivations as well in wanting to help. They're companies. They want to make some money. They want to sell services. And that, again, can sometimes conflict with your best interests with doing a migration. Now, something that I've blogged about fairly recently and something that I have seen a lot about is that partners, third-party consultancies in the last 6 months or a year have looked around in the market and they have seen that a lot of companies want to migrate to Power BI. They've seen that people want to migrate as quickly and efficiently as possible. And they've thought, wow, well, Power BI is just a bit of technology. The old BI tool, that did roughly the same thing. I wonder if I can build a tool to migrate from legacy BI tools to Power BI automatically. Because if I can do that and I can sell that, I'm going to make absolutely tons of money. I'll be able to turn up to a customer and say, use my tool, click a button, all of your reports will migrate. You can save money, you pay money, everybody will benefit. Is this really going to be the case? Is it really going to work like this? Well, unfortunately not. There's a few things to say about this. I'm going to come out and be completely clear. I think lift and shift approaches to migration to Power BI are a very, very, very bad idea. As I've already said, you have to look at how your data is modeled. You have to look at the functionality of your old tool, the functionality of Power BI, the business requirements. You've got all of these different things go against the idea of just taking what you had before, pressing a button and generating the same thing in Power BI. That's not to say that the automated migration tools that partners are building are completely useless. I mean, I've seen at least 5 different versions of the same thing, and I've seen a lot of valuable things in them. Now, generally speaking, the valuable things are all the automated tools that allow you to discover things about your existing BI tool. For example, what reports exist? What data sources do they use? Who's actually using these reports? There are tools that can query the logs of these legacy BI tools that you've got and give you answers to these questions. And these are valuable answers when you're thinking about migrating. The thing you've got to be on guard for is anybody that says you can just click a button and recreate your old reports in Power BI. First of all, you've got to make a distinction between migrating the reports and then the data sets behind them. Because the important thing to say is there is no supported programmatic way of generating PBIX files, which means there is no real supported way of generating Power BI regular reports. It's just not possible in a supported way. There are tools that can do it, but they aren't supported. And anybody that comes to you with a tool that will generate a PBIX file, for example, is selling you snake oil. Yeah, so you should really run a mile when anybody tries to tell you about that. It is definitely supported to generate RDL paginated reports. Is that a good thing? Well, I mean, possibly. I'm more open-minded to that. So perhaps for the audience here, generating RDL paginated reports could be, a good starting point. If you're going down the route of generating Power BI datasets, that is supported. There are some caveats and limitations there. But again, I'm very skeptical that anything can automatically generate a useful data set based on a star schema. It could give you something, but to be honest, it's not going to save you an awful lot of time. So there are definitely good parts of automated migration tools, but be very, very skeptical when somebody comes and tells you that they have a tool that at the click of a button will magically regenerate all of your reports in Power BI. They are telling you porcupines, I'm afraid. Having said that, not all partners are going to try and sell you a tool. Some of them are just going to go with the old school factory approach of lots and lots and lots of people sitting in a darkened room for a long time, churning out new Power BI reports to recreate what you had before. In this situation, you've got to be, again, very careful, and you've got to think about how much is this really going to cost? Because if you think about it, a large organization may have several thousand reports. Are they used or not? Well, that's a good question. People always say reports are important, even if they're not always used. And partners, when they look at this, they're going to be quite conservative with their quotes because they know that, projects like this always overrun in time and cost, and they're also very, very political as well. So maybe let's say you've got 2,000 reports you need to move. Maybe it's going to be like $1,000 in 5 days for migrating every single report. This might seem a little bit steep, but I'm basing these figures on figures that I've actually heard quoted for a real life customer. Do the math. 2,000 reports times $1,000. That's a $2 million project. Even worse, 2,000 reports times 5 days per report is 10,000 person days, which if you say, we've got 10 consultants working for 260 days a year, that's getting on for a 4-year project. That's going to take an awful long time. Nobody wants to spend that much time moving to Power BI. And, I've certainly seen partners and customers get involved in lift and shift projects with these types of numbers. And it's not a good place for anybody to be in. So I'm quite skeptical about all of this. At which point you're probably thinking, this is an awful lot of negatives. Is it even possible to migrate to Power BI when you've got to do all this extra work to do things properly, when lift and shift isn't going to work, when there's no magic tools that automatically generate things? So to end on a positive note, what I will say is that we've got an awful lot of customers out there who have successfully moved from old tools to Power BI. And we have, some kind of anonymized case studies in our documentation that I showed at the beginning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the things that we've seen that are the hallmarks of successful BI migration projects to Power BI. And what I would say is that all of these projects tend to be driven by end users. So let me talk about one very large international consumer goods company that we've worked with that is, I promise, a really, really large user of Power BI, and how they managed to migrate from another tool to Power BI in under 2 years in order to kind of get off that platform before a renewal took place. What did they do? Well, first of all, and I think this is perhaps key to any successful migration, they had very, very strong executive sponsorship. They made a decision to move to Power BI, and they said there are going to be absolutely no exceptions. Once you've got the executive sponsorship for this, all of those hard conversations, you'll still have them, but you'll at least be able to win the arguments. Because, as we've seen, as soon as you start to migrate to Power BI, it'll be like, oh, I don't like this tool. Oh, it's slow. It doesn't do what my old reports did. Tough. We're going to be doing this anyway. So what this organization did was, once they got that executive sponsorship and that drive to be able to move to Power BI, they started on that discovery process. They had a look and saw what reports they had in their legacy BI tool. And like I said, there are some great tools out there that will allow you to find and understand how to do this. The customer in question actually rebuilt these tools using Power BI against the logs of these old BI tools. But you can get these tools now that allow you to discover your existing data landscape off the shelf. So they had a look for these reports, and they basically said, any reports that haven't been used for over a year, we're just going to delete. We're going to send an email to the people that we think own these reports, but we're just going to go ahead and delete them. Now, in some cases, the people that own these reports came back and said, hey, we want these back. We're going to still use them. In which case you can still undelete the reports, but the vast majority of reports got deleted. When they did that and things had settled down, they went back in and then they deleted the reports that hadn't been used in 6 months, and then reports that hadn't been used in 3 months, and then reports that hadn't been used in 1 month. And by taking this approach, they really, really understood which reports were being used and which ones were valuable, because they were the ones that people emailed about and said, don't delete it, or hey, you deleted my report, I'm still using it. If you start to have the arguments about, do you want to use this report before there's the threat of deletion, people always say, well, yeah, I'm probably going to use it, or I don't really know. Deleting the reports is going to be one of those things where it kind of forces the agenda. The next thing they said is we are going to ban all new development on the legacy platform. Again, this is something where executive sponsorship was needed. And then they went round to the business and said, you are going to build the replacements for your reports in Power BI yourself. You can certainly get in external help. You can certainly engage partners, but this is going to be something that is driven, and in most cases, the work is actually going to be done by internal people. It's not going to be outsourced. Now, you can imagine that this was not a message that these business units wanted to hear. And again, this is where executive sponsorship was key. But after the arguments were won, and accepting the fact that this whole migration process is going to take time because rebuilding takes 1 to 2 years, what they found is that actually this was a successful strategy. Because for a start, by decentralizing and forcing the business to take ownership of the reports they used in their migration, it ended up being cheaper and faster than using a partner, because partners are a small number of people. There are a much larger number of people spread out around the business who use reports and who are motivated to kind of rebuild things in the new tool. So rather than paying money for an external consultancy, doing everything internally ended up being cheaper. And it also built up that culture of self-service BI that they wanted to foster anyway. And it was a great opportunity to build up those technical skill levels internally as well. And going back to what I was saying before, it not only helped because business understood its own requirements, but it helped avoid those arguments about, hey, my old BI tool used to do this, I want the new tool to do this as well. Because when you've got a customer talking to a partner, it's very easy for the customer to say, hey, no compromises, just do this. And when the partner comes back and says, oh, well, Power BI doesn't work in that way, it's very easy for you as a customer to say, well, you're just trying to get out of the work, just do it. If you are actually doing the migration yourself and you see that Power BI doesn't work in the way that your old BI tool does, it's much easier for you to compromise with yourself and say, well, actually, did I really need it to work like that? Well, no, I'm going to do it somewhere else, a different way. So what they found was that actually there was a lot less politics involved with migration. There was a lot less of people digging their heels in, because as they learned about Power BI and the cool things it could do and the way it worked, yeah, there was a bit of pain at the beginning, but it wasn't political. It didn't turn into customer vendor politics and complaints about overruns and contracts and things. You just solved the problem yourself and moved on. So ultimately, this approach to migrating to Power BI worked a lot better. It built up the skills, it created that self-service environment. Obviously, there was a lot of training and hand-holding and guidance and people messing up and people needing to be rescued. But the same things would have happened with a partner-led migration. And ultimately, it got them to a much better place, a much more competent, digitally aware and compromising BI environment than perhaps they had before. So that's all I have to say. I'm quite happy to kind of take some questions and have a discussion at this point.
Thank you so much, Chris, for this lovely, lovely presentation on the do's and don'ts of using BI tools and moving to paginated reports. I do talk to customers a lot myself as well, and I do find customers that have these legacy BI tools in their environment, and it's just as you said, especially for the motivations for migrating, and then also some of the issues that they come with using Power BI data sets and data modeling. So I really appreciate this, and I hope that others got some feedback here as well. And that's why we open up the chat. So please if you have any questions, please feel free to put some in the chat here so that we can answer.
So I can see Ilya's comments about moving to 13 to 14 months from 1 year. And I can absolutely see why you're saying that, because there are going to be some reports that are only used once a year. I would actually say that 1 year is probably better than 13 to 14 months, because again, part of the reason to have this exercise is to be provocative, to go in and deliberately delete the stuff that people have got, some of which may be useful. Well, maybe not delete, but threaten to delete things that they've got. And even if there are reports that are only used once a year, then that kind of, it forces that deadline of we're going to delete reports that haven't been used for a year, forces people to think about what they've got and what they haven't got, and that means that they will actually go in and tell you, about those reports that have been used only once a year. So this is, perhaps like I said, it's a bit of a provocative act, going in and saying we're going to be deleting reports that haven't been used for once a year, and it's going to create some pushback. But at times like this, I think some pushback and some riling people is strangely quite a useful thing to do.
So you want to take yourself off of mute and ask your question?
If you're able to unmute yourself, Ilya, let me. You're off mute.
So what's your experience migrating from SSRS to, or what you heard from people who migrated from SSRS to Power BI? Specific concern will be about performance, because obviously SSRS runs usually on the same box or in the same data center very close to the data, versus Power BI is running in the cloud and you have all the latencies related to that type of scenarios.
So I guess I'll put my hands up and say that my presentation is mostly about migrating from other tools to Power BI rather than from SSRS to Power BI. I think what I would say, though, is a lot of the issues that come up with SSRS to Power BI migrations are more or less the same ones that you get with migrating from other tools. Because yes, there are going to be things that don't work as well. There are going to be compromises. There's functionality that you lose. And your end users, they don't necessarily care about the costs and the ideal of having everything in the cloud. They just want their reports. So the point, I think, about those compromises, yeah, it's fine. There are going to be things that are perhaps slower. There are going to be things that functionality you lose by moving from SSRS to Power BI. Unfortunately, I think you're going to have to get executive sponsorship and get people to accept that those things are different. I'm not saying that customers or end users need to accept a substandard experience, but there's often a very gray area between a substandard experience and things that people should be able to compromise with. And I would also say, maybe this is the wrong forum to say it, but maybe if you're moving from SSRS, some of those reports can be moved to paginated reports. Perhaps some of them shouldn't be. Perhaps some of them should be moved to regular Power BI reports, or go to analyze in Excel. Because let's face it, a lot of SSRS reports are just used to export to Excel. So maybe it is better to look and see what people are doing and remodel as a data set, and then get people to use Excel pivot tables instead.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And in our migration tool guidance, we do talk a little bit about migrating. Of course, this is to prepare you for SSRS to Power BI. And like Chris said, we also say that some reports would need a Power BI report instead. But for paginated reports, you can, of course, utilize the tool. It should be a seamless environment. However, that's why we have those resources with the capacity planning. So that's something that you want to take a look at as well. And then if you're using your enterprise gateway, we do ask that you look at the regions where your users are and where you're trying to provide access, because that also makes a difference. So there's other things that you can do, and definitely we know that that is a concern for customers, but let us know if you have any questions as you go through this process. That's what I'm here for. So, bring those questions to me and we can take it to the product team and we'll talk about it and figure out if we can help you in any way. Okay.
Cool.
Are there
There are
any
some
other
questions in
questions?
the chat I can
Okay.
see. Sorry, Cookie. So yeah, I see Ramesh is asking about analyzing Excel. So analyzing Excel, when I say analyze in Excel, that's referring to functionality in Power BI, where when you've got a Power BI data set in the service containing your data, you can create an Excel report in Excel on the desktop or an Excel online with pivot tables or Excel cube functions connecting directly to the data set. So you're not exporting data to Excel, but you can actually make data in Power BI appear live and update automatically inside Excel. So definitely check it out. I think it's one of the most important features in Power BI. I'm a big fan of it.
Thank you.
And then Carmen has a question about migrating from Tableau to Power BI. Any tips and expectations? Yeah, I think a couple of things to say about this. First of all, I think a lot of people are migrating from Tableau at the moment for a number of different reasons: cost, worries about Salesforce, and so on. I have the greatest respect for Tableau. Tableau is a great BI tool, and I don't think it's going to be controversial to say that Tableau has got some. It's possible to build really, really, really amazing visualizations in Tableau. Now, you can build some great visualizations in Power BI, but it's an area that we're working on and we're improving. If you look out on LinkedIn or Twitter or various user groups, there is a program manager called Miguel Myers who is specifically setting out our plans to improve the core visuals in Power BI and make them really, really beautiful as Tableau. But for now, what you might find is when people migrate from Tableau to Power BI, they will say, my Tableau reports look beautiful, my Power BI reports look terrible. I'm not moving because I don't want to have like this really awful visualization experience. A lot of that is to do with people not understanding how Power BI works or understanding how to get the best out of Power BI, but also at the same time understand that the default visuals in Power BI are going to get a lot better very soon, and we're going to have a really, really outstanding look and feel by default. And I think following on from that as well, Tableau, like Power BI, is a tool that's got its own devoted fan base. There are people who've built their entire careers around Tableau in the way that someone like me has built my entire life and career around Power BI. If you say to those people that you're going to be migrating away from Tableau to Power BI, they're not going to be happy, regardless of what you say. There is always going to be pushback, because if your entire career is based around a tool and now you're going to be forced to use something else, there is always going to be pushback. So be prepared for that. There's not much you can do. But I've certainly met more than my fair share of people who used to be Tableau professionals who've now moved to Power BI and really enjoy using Power BI as well.
All right. Thank you all so much for attending. We are at time. And Chris, thank you very much, of course, for giving us this presentation. If you all have any questions and want to continue the discussion, you can do so in the user group comment section for the event, or in the discussion panel in the general reporting services migration user group. So again, thank everyone for their attendance, and we look forward to the next user group meeting. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.